The sound wasn't a scream. It was the sharp echo of something going wrong in a place that was supposed to be safe. A single moment that would replay in people's minds long after the truth came out. And by the time anyone realized what it meant, it was already too late to pretend it was an accident. Emily Carter never thought silence could feel this loud. Not until she found herself standing at the top of a polished marble staircase inside a building that smelled like money, power, and carefully hidden secrets, her hand resting protectively over her 7-month belly as the city lights stretched beyond the glass walls like a promise that didn't belong to her anymore. And just hours earlier, everything had still looked normal, or at least normal enough to keep the illusion alive. 2 hours before that moment, the evening had begun with nothing more than a quiet decision. The kind that doesn't feel like a turning point until you look back and realize it was the first crack in everything. As Emily adjusted the soft fabric of her dress and checked the time on her phone, waiting for a husband who had slowly become a stranger. A man who used to call her during lunch breaks just to hear her voice, but now barely looked up from his screen when she spoke. And yet she still showed up, still tried, because that's what she had always done. She built, she supported, she believed. Daniel Carter, CEO of a fast-growing tech firm, and a man whose name carried weight in rooms Emily had once been proud to enter beside him, had changed in ways that couldn't be explained by long hours or stress. His absence no longer just physical, but something colder, something deliberate. And when the elevator doors opened that night revealing a reflection she didn't expect to see, everything shifted without a single word being spoken. Vanessa Blake didn't look surprised, not even a little. Standing there in a tailored coat that cost more than most people's monthly rent, her posture relaxed, her expression calm in a way that suggested she had been waiting for this exact moment. And it was that calmness that unsettled Emily more than anything else, because it meant this wasn't spontaneous, it wasn't messy or accidental, it was controlled. Emily tried to keep her voice steady, tried to hold on to the version of herself that believed conversations could still fix things, but the air between them felt different, heavier, like stepping into a room where the outcome had already been decided, and she was the only one who hadn't read the script. And somewhere deep inside, beneath the confusion and the quiet hope she refused to let go of, something began to shift. Vanessa didn't raise her voice, didn't make a scene, and that made every word land harder. Each sentence delivered with the precision of someone who understood exactly where to apply pressure, and Emily felt it. Not as fear, but as the slow realization that the life she thought she understood had been carefully rearranged without her noticing. There are moments when the world doesn't fall apart all at once, but instead tilts just enough for you to lose your balance. And Emily would later remember the way the lights reflected off the marble, the faint hum of distant traffic, the sound of her own heartbeat louder than it had ever been, as if her body already knew something her mind hadn't accepted yet. And even then, even standing there between truth and denial, she still believed she could walk away with something intact, not knowing that within minutes, everything she thought she was protecting would be tested in ways she could never have imagined. And somewhere far below, a security camera continued recording, capturing every second that would soon matter more than anyone in that building realized. Vanessa tilted her head slightly, studying Emily with a kind of patience that felt rehearsed, as if she had already played this scene in her mind more than once, and was now simply watching it unfold exactly as expected. And that calm certainty did something unsettling to the air between them, because it removed any doubt that this moment had been carefully set in motion long before Emily stepped into that elevator, long before she even began to suspect that her life was no longer her own. Emily shifted her weight, one hand still resting over her stomach, feeling a faint movement that grounded her just enough to stay present, to keep her voice from breaking, and she told herself to stay composed, to ask questions, to demand clarity, but the words felt heavier than they should have, like they belonged to someone else who had not yet realized what was already slipping away. Vanessa's eyes flickered briefly toward Emily's hand, toward the quiet reminder of what Emily was protecting, and then back up again, her expression unchanged, and when she spoke, her tone carried no urgency, no anger, only a quiet confidence that made every sentence feel final before it was even finished. She spoke about time, about how long things had been changing, about how people often hold on to versions of relationships that no longer exist, and Emily felt something tighten in her chest as each word landed with a precision that suggested this was not a confrontation but a conclusion, something already decided behind closed doors where Emily had not been invited. Daniel's name came up not as a question but as a statement, and that was when Emily understood that this was not about discovery, it was about acknowledgement, about forcing her to see something that had already been built in the shadows, and the realization did not come with anger at first, but with a quiet, disorienting clarity that made everything else fade for a moment. She remembered the late nights, the missed calls, the subtle shifts in tone that she had explained away as stress or pressure, and now those memories rearranged themselves into something sharper, something undeniable, and still, even then, she searched Vanessa's face for something human, something uncertain, but found only control. There is a specific kind of silence that follows the moment you understand that you have been the last to know, and it is not loud or dramatic. It is quiet, almost gentle, and that is what made it dangerous, because it allows everything to continue for just a few seconds longer before the ground shifts completely beneath you. Emily inhaled slowly, steadying herself, aware of the distance behind her, aware of the staircase she had passed moments earlier without a second thought, and she chose her next words carefully, not as a plea, but as a line she was trying to draw, something to hold on to in a situation that was already slipping beyond her control. Vanessa stepped slightly closer, not enough to invade space, just enough to change the dynamic, to make it clear that she was no longer an observer, but an active force in this moment. And the shift was subtle but unmistakable, like the final move in a game where one player had been planning several steps ahead all along. Emily felt the building around her differently now, the polished surfaces, the quiet hum of distant offices, the sense that everything here had been designed to look flawless while hiding everything that mattered. And somewhere in the background, unnoticed by both of them, a small red light continued blinking on a security camera mounted near the ceiling, capturing angles and seconds and details that would soon carry more weight than any words spoken in that hallway. Because what happens next is rarely defined by what people say, but by what they cannot take back once it is seen. Emily did not step back immediately, and that was the first thing that changed the rhythm of the moment, because Vanessa had expected hesitation, maybe even retreat, but instead there was a pause that felt deliberate, a fraction of a second where Emily seemed to gather something invisible around her, something quieter than anger, but far more difficult to break. And when she finally spoke again, her voice was lower, steadier, carrying a weight that had not been there before, as if the confusion had already begun to harden into something else. She did not ask Vanessa to explain anymore, because there was nothing left to explain, not really, and that realization settled into her like a quiet certainty, the kind that does not need confirmation to be true. And for the first time that night, she stopped looking at Vanessa for answers and instead began to see her as part of a larger picture, something that had been moving around her for months without her noticing. Vanessa's expression shifted, just slightly, not enough for most people to catch it, but enough to reveal that this was not the reaction she had planned for, and in that brief moment, the control she carried so effortlessly seemed to tighten, like someone adjusting their grip when the outcome becomes less predictable. Emily became aware of her surroundings again, not just as a backdrop, but as something tangible, the cool air against her skin, the faint echo of footsteps somewhere far down the hallway, the distant hum of the city pressing against the glass walls, and beneath it all, the quiet, steady presence of her own breathing, anchoring her in a moment that felt both immediate and distant at the same time. There are moments when people realize they are no longer standing in the same story they believed they were in, and Emily felt that shift now, not as a dramatic break, but as a subtle turning point, like a page being flipped without warning, and once it happens, there is no way to go back to what came before. Vanessa took another small step, her tone softening in a way that felt almost practiced, as if she were adjusting the approach, recalibrating the conversation to maintain control, and she spoke about inevitability, about how certain outcomes are simply the result of choices made over time, choices that cannot be undone no matter how much someone wishes they could. And Emily listened, not because she agreed, but because she understood now that every word being said was part of a narrative that had been carefully constructed to lead her to a specific conclusion. The staircase behind her no longer felt like just a feature of the building, but like a boundary, something that marked the line between what had been and what was about to happen, and Emily became aware of the distance again, the smooth surface beneath her shoes, the way the light reflected off each step in perfect symmetry, and for a brief second, she imagined what it would look like from above, from the perspective of the camera she had not noticed earlier, capturing everything without judgment, without bias, recording truth in a way that people often fail to do. She shifted her stance slightly, not retreating, just adjusting, and that small movement seemed to ripple through the moment, creating a tension that had not been there before, a quiet uncertainty that neither of them acknowledged. Out loud, and somewhere in that silence, something unseen began to take shape, something that would not reveal itself until much later, when words would no longer matter and only what had been recorded, preserved, and revealed would decide everything. Because sometimes the most important turning points are not the loud ones, but the ones that pass almost unnoticed, leaving behind evidence that waits patiently for the right moment to be seen. Vanessa's smile did not disappear, but it changed, becoming thinner, more precise, like a line drawn carefully to hide something beneath it. And for the first time, there was a flicker of impatience behind her eyes, a subtle shift that suggested the moment was no longer unfolding exactly as she had planned, because Emily had not broken, had not stepped back, had not given her the reaction that would make everything easier to control, and that small resistance altered the balance in a way neither of them acknowledged out loud. Emily felt it too, not as victory, but as awareness, the kind that sharpens every detail around you. The faint vibration of her phone against her palm, the distant hum of an elevator arriving on another floor, the way the light above them cast long reflections across the polished surface of the staircase, and suddenly everything felt more defined, more real, as if the illusion had been stripped away and what remained was something she could finally see clearly. Vanessa spoke again, but this time her words carried a different edge, still calm, still measured, but with a quiet insistence that revealed something underneath, something closer to urgency than confidence, and she began to reference decisions that had already been made, conversations that had taken place without Emily, plans that did not include her. And it was in those details that Emily understood the depth of what had been happening, not just a betrayal, but a restructuring of her entire life behind closed doors, piece by piece, until there was almost nothing left that belonged to her. Daniel's absence in that moment became louder than any argument, his silence echoing through every word Vanessa spoke, and Emily realized that what hurt was not just what had happened, but how thoroughly it had been allowed to happen, how completely she had been removed from decisions that defined her own future, and that realization settled into her with a weight that did not break her, but steadied her, like something shifting into place. Vanessa took another step closer, closing the distance just enough to make the space feel smaller, more contained, and her voice lowered slightly, as if she were offering something final, something meant to end the conversation on her terms, and she spoke about moving forward, about letting go, about how certain situations resolve themselves when people accept what they cannot change. And the words were delivered with a softness that felt almost rehearsed, like a script designed to sound reasonable while masking something far less generous beneath it. Emily listened without interrupting, her gaze steady now, no longer searching for answers, no longer hoping for an explanation that would make sense of everything. And in that stillness, something inside her settled, something that replaced uncertainty with clarity, not about what she had lost, but about what she was no longer willing to accept. She shifted slightly again, her hand brushing the cool railing beside her, grounding herself in the physical reality of where she stood, and she became aware of how quiet the building had become, how isolated the moment felt despite being surrounded by glass and light, and the distant presence of others who had no idea what was unfolding just floors above them. The camera mounted high in the corner continued its silent work, capturing angles that neither woman considered, recording expressions, distances, movements that would later be replayed and examined with a clarity that no memory could match. And while Vanessa focused on control, on shaping the outcome of this conversation, Emily began to understand something else entirely. Something that had nothing to do with what was being said and everything to do with what was being preserved. Because in moments like this, truth does not disappear, It waits, patient and exact, for the moment it can no longer be denied. And as the silence stretched between them once more, that truth moved closer to the surface, unseen but inevitable. Emily did not respond right away, and that silence stretched longer than anything Vanessa had said, longer than the carefully measured words about moving forward and letting go. Because it was not empty silence. It was full, dense with something that had finally settled into place, something that no longer needed permission or explanation to exist. And when Emily finally lifted her gaze again, there was a calm there that had not been present before, a quiet clarity that made the moment feel different, as if the direction had shifted without either of them physically moving. Vanessa noticed it instantly, even if she did not acknowledge it. And for the first time since the conversation began, there was the faintest hesitation in her posture, a fraction of uncertainty that passed quickly, but not quickly enough to disappear completely, because control depends on predictability, and Emily was no longer predictable in the way Vanessa had expected. Emily's hand remained steady against the railing now, not gripping it, just resting there, as if she had anchored herself to something solid within the space, and her breathing had evened out in a way that signaled not resignation, but decision, the kind that forms quietly and then refuses to be undone. And when she spoke again, her voice did not rise, did not tremble. It simply existed, clear and measured, carrying a weight that came from understanding rather than emotion. She did not argue about the past, did not question the timeline Vanessa had laid out, because none of that mattered anymore in the way it had just minutes earlier. And that shift in focus changed the entire tone of the moment, turning what had been a confrontation into something closer to recognition, a line being drawn without needing to be announced. Vanessa attempted to reclaim the narrative, adjusting her stance slightly, her expression smoothing back into that composed confidence she had worn so easily before, and she spoke again about inevitability, about how certain outcomes cannot be avoided once they are set in motion. But there was a subtle urgency now beneath the surface, a need to re-establish control that had not been there at the beginning. Emily listened, but this time there was a distance in her attention, not physical distance, but something internal, as if she had stepped outside the version of the moment Vanessa was trying to construct and was now observing it from somewhere else, somewhere steadier. And in that space, things looked different, clearer, stripped of the emotional weight that had once made them confusing. The building around them seemed almost too still, the quiet hum of electricity, the soft glow of overhead lights, the reflections stretching across the marble steps behind her, all of it creating a sense of suspended time, as if the world had narrowed to this single point where something irreversible was about to happen, even if neither of them named it out loud. Emily shifted her weight again, just slightly, enough to change her angle, enough to bring the staircase more fully into her awareness, and for a brief moment she glanced upward, not at Vanessa, not at anything directly in front of her, but toward the space above, where unseen and unnoticed, the small red indicator of the camera continued to blink steadily, capturing everything with quiet precision. That glance lasted only a second, but it marked something important, something Vanessa did not register, because her focus remained fixed on control, on the conversation, on the outcome she believed she could still shape. Emily lowered her gaze again, meeting Vanessa's eyes with a steadiness that carried no hostility, no fear, only certainty. And in that look was something final, something that did not need to be spoken to be understood, because sometimes the most decisive moments are not loud, they are quiet, almost imperceptible, defined not by what is done, but by what is no longer allowed to continue. And as the silence settled between them once more, the balance shifted in a way that could not be reversed, even if neither of them fully understood it yet. The elevator chimed somewhere down the corridor, a soft, distant sound that should have meant nothing, but in that moment it felt like a signal, like something shifting just out of sight, and Emily noticed how Vanessa's attention flickered for a fraction of a second before returning, sharper now, more focused, as if time itself had become something she needed to control rather than something she could casually move through. Emily remained still, her posture unchanged, but inside, something had already moved forward, something that no longer depended on what Vanessa said or did next, because the moment had stopped being about persuasion or explanation and had quietly transformed into something else entirely, something that would not reveal its full shape until later, when all the pieces were placed side by side and seen for what they truly were. Vanessa spoke again, but the tone had shifted, just enough to expose the strain beneath it, a subtle tightening that betrayed the effort it took to maintain the image of certainty she had carried so easily before, and she began to press harder, her words more direct now, more pointed, as if she were trying to force the moment toward a conclusion before it slipped beyond her reach. She referenced decisions, timelines, outcomes that she claimed were already finalized, and there was an insistence there that had not existed earlier, a quiet urgency that revealed more than she intended, because certainty does not rush, it does not need to push, and yet here she was, pushing. Emily listened without reacting, her gaze steady, her expression calm in a way that felt almost distant, and that distance created something unexpected, a space where Vanessa's words began to lose their weight, not because they were untrue, but because they no longer held the power they were meant to carry. And in that space, Emily began to see not just what had been done, but how it had been done, the careful layering of decisions, the silent agreements, the deliberate omissions that had built this moment piece by piece. She shifted her hand slightly along the railing, feeling the cool surface beneath her fingers, grounding herself again in the present, in something real and unchanging. And as she did, her eyes moved briefly, almost unconsciously, toward the far corner of the ceiling where the small camera remained fixed, its quiet presence unchanged, its recording uninterrupted. And this time, the awareness lingered just a fraction longer, not enough to draw attention, but enough to settle into her understanding as something significant. Vanessa stepped closer again, closing the distance with a confidence that felt more forced now, her voice lowering as if she were offering a final resolution, something meant to end the conversation on her terms, and she spoke about acceptance, about how people often hold on to things that are already gone, how letting go is sometimes the only way forward, and the words were smooth, carefully chosen, but beneath them was something sharper, something that revealed the effort it took to keep everything aligned. Emily did not interrupt, did not challenge, and that lack of resistance seemed to encourage Vanessa, pushing her further into the narrative she had constructed, until the moment reached a point where the balance felt fragile, as if one more word, one more step, would tip it in a direction neither of them could fully control. The building remained quiet, the city lights beyond the glass steady and indifferent, and somewhere beneath them, unseen and unheard, the flow of life continued without pause, unaware that above it, in this controlled and polished space, something irreversible was taking shape, not in a sudden, dramatic way, but in a series of small, precise moments that would only reveal their full impact when viewed together, when the silence was replaced by evidence, and the story no longer belonged to the people telling it, but to what had been captured, preserved, and eventually brought into the light. Vanessa's composure held, but only just, like glass under pressure that had not shattered yet, but carried the unmistakable tension of something close to breaking, and Emily could see it now, not in any obvious expression, but in the smallest details, the way Vanessa's fingers tightened slightly around the strap of her bag, the way her shoulders squared a fraction too rigidly, the way her gaze lingered a second longer than necessary, as if recalculating, adjusting, searching for a path back to control that was no longer as secure as it had been. Moments before, Emily did not move, did not step forward or back, but there was a shift within her that changed everything, a quiet alignment of thought and awareness that replaced uncertainty with something far more stable, something rooted in understanding rather than reaction, and in that stillness, she realized that the conversation itself had already reached its end, even if the words had not. Vanessa spoke again, but now there was an edge that could not be disguised, a firmness that bordered on insistence, as she repeated the idea of inevitability, of outcomes already decided, as if saying it enough times could make it absolute, could make it immune to whatever unseen variable had begun to unsettle her confidence. And yet the more she spoke, the clearer it became that she was no longer guiding the moment. She was chasing it. Emily's attention drifted briefly, not away from Vanessa, but beyond her, to the space just over her shoulder where the hallway opened toward the elevators. And for a second, everything slowed. The faint glow of the floor indicator lights, the soft reflection of movement in the polished surfaces, the quiet presence of a world continuing uninterrupted just beyond this contained moment. And it struck her then how small this space really was, how controlled, how temporary, compared to what existed outside of it, compared to what would happen once this moment left the boundaries of this hallway and entered a place where it could no longer be managed or contained. She returned her gaze to Vanessa, and when she spoke, her voice carried no challenge, no accusation, only a calm certainty that did not ask for agreement, did not seek validation, it simply existed. And that was what made it powerful, because it removed the need for conflict entirely. Vanessa's response came quickly, almost too quickly, her words sharper now, more direct, as if she were trying to anchor the situation before it drifted further out of reach, and she stepped closer again, closing the gap between them with a confidence that felt rehearsed rather than natural. And in that step, in that movement, something shifted in the space between them, something subtle but undeniable, like a line being crossed without acknowledgement. Emily did not retreat, but she adjusted, a slight repositioning that changed the dynamic just enough, her hand brushing again against the railing, her stance steady, grounded, and for a moment, there was a stillness so complete it felt almost suspended, like the breath held just before something irreversible unfolds. Above them, unnoticed, the camera continued its silent recording, capturing angles that would later be examined frame by frame, preserving details neither of them could fully account for in memory alone. And in that quiet documentation, something far more powerful than words was taking shape. Vanessa spoke one more time, her voice lower now, controlled but strained, as if delivering a final statement meant to close the moment on her terms. But Emily did not respond immediately, and in that pause, that deliberate silence, the balance shifted once again, not dramatically, not visibly, but in a way that would only become clear later, when the moment was no longer theirs to define, when what had been said and done would stand on its own, undeniable and complete, because sometimes the outcome is not decided by who speaks the loudest, but by what remains when the talking stops. Vanessa's final words seemed to linger in the air longer than they should have, as if the space itself was holding on to them, testing their weight, measuring their certainty, and for a brief moment, everything became still, not empty, but suspended, like a pause that carries more meaning than any sentence could, and in that stillness, something shifted in a way that neither of them could immediately see, but both of them could feel. Emily did not answer right away, and this time the silence was different from before, not uncertain, not searching, but deliberate, controlled, the kind of silence that does not wait for permission to exist. And as she stood there, her posture steady, her gaze calm, it became clear that whatever had been expected of her in this moment no longer applied. Vanessa's expression tightened again, just slightly, the composure still there, but no longer effortless, and she adjusted her stance as if grounding herself, as if reminding herself of the role she had been playing. But something about the moment had already slipped beyond that role, beyond the careful structure she had built around it. Emily finally spoke, and when she did, her voice was quiet, but it carried with it a clarity that cut through everything else, not sharp or aggressive, but precise, like a line drawn with certainty rather than force. And in that voice was something Vanessa had not accounted for, something that could not be redirected or reshaped. She did not argue, did not accuse, did not revisit anything that had already been said, and that absence of conflict made her words land with even greater impact, because they did not ask for agreement. They simply existed as truth, and in that truth was the understanding that the moment had already moved beyond negotiation. Vanessa responded quickly, almost reflexively, her tone sharper now, her control more visible in the way she held herself, and she took another step, closing the distance once again, as if proximity could restore the balance she felt slipping. But in doing so, she crossed something unseen, something that shifted the dynamic in a way she did not recognize, because not all boundaries are marked clearly, and not all lines announce themselves when they are crossed. Emily remained where she was, her hand still resting lightly against the railing, her stance grounded, and as Vanessa moved, Emily adjusted just enough to maintain her balance, a small, almost imperceptible shift that carried more meaning than it appeared to. And in that moment, Something irreversible took place, not loud, not dramatic, but final in a way that could not be undone. The space changed, the air itself seeming to tighten, and the quiet hum of the building faded into the background as the moment narrowed into something precise, something contained, and above them, the camera continued its silent work, capturing every movement, every shift in position, every detail that would later be examined with a clarity no one in that hallway was considering. Vanessa spoke again, her voice lower now, controlled but strained, as if trying to reclaim the moment one last time, but Emily did not respond, not immediately, and in that pause, the balance tipped fully, not toward confrontation, but toward something else entirely, something that existed beyond the control of either of them. Emily's gaze lifted slightly, not to Vanessa, but past her, toward the open space beyond, toward something unseen but understood, and when she looked back, there was no hesitation left, no uncertainty, only a quiet resolve that did not need to be explained. The moment held for one final second, suspended between what had been and what would come next, and then it shifted, not with noise or chaos, but with a quiet inevitability, like a decision that had already been made finally revealing itself, and somewhere in that shift, everything changed in a way that could no longer be contained within the walls of that building. Because once a moment like this moves beyond silence, it does not stay hidden, it becomes something else entirely, something that waits to be seen, to be understood, and eventually, to be answered in a place where truth is no longer optional. The moment did not end with a shout or a sudden movement. It ended with something far quieter, far more decisive, the kind of shift that does not announce itself but changes everything all the same. And Emily felt it before she fully understood it, a subtle release of tension in the air, a sense that whatever had been holding this moment in place had finally given way to something that could not be reversed. Vanessa seemed to feel it too, even if she did not recognize it for what it was, her posture tightening, her expression holding steady but no longer as effortless, as if she were waiting for something to happen that never came, waiting for Emily to react in a way that would restore the balance she had lost, but that reaction never arrived. Instead, Emily simply stepped back, not in retreat, but in quiet conclusion, her movement controlled, deliberate, and in that single step was everything that needed to be said, a boundary drawn without words, a decision made without explanation, and for a brief second, Vanessa remained where she was, caught between the version of the moment she had expected and the reality unfolding in front of her. The silence that followed was different from anything before it, not tense, not uncertain, but resolved, like a chapter closing without needing to be read aloud. And in that silence, the weight of everything that had been said, everything that had been implied, settled into place with a clarity that no argument could have achieved. Emily turned slightly, her hand leaving the railing as she adjusted her balance. And for the first time since the conversation began, her attention moved fully away from Vanessa, not out of dismissal, but out of understanding that there was nothing left in that direction that required her presence. And that shift, that simple redirection of focus, changed the entire meaning of the moment. Vanessa spoke again, her voice sharper now, carrying an edge that had not been there at the beginning, as if trying to pull the moment back into something she could still control, but the words landed differently this time, not because they had changed, but because Emily had. And there is a point in every story where the same words lose their power simply because the person hearing them is no longer the same person they were before. Emily did not respond, not immediately, and when she finally did, her voice was quiet, steady, carrying no trace of the uncertainty that had once defined it. And in that voice was something final, something that did not seek agreement or validation, something that existed entirely on its own, and that was what made it impossible to challenge. Above them, the camera continued its silent recording, capturing the final seconds of a moment that would soon exist far beyond this hallway, far beyond the polished surfaces and controlled environment of this building, preserving details that would later be seen in a different light, in a different setting, where context could no longer be shaped by the people involved, but by what had actually occurred. Emily took another step, this time toward the open space of the hallway, toward the world beyond this contained moment, and as she moved, the distance between her and Vanessa became more than physical, It became definitive, a separation that could not be undone by words or intentions. And for a brief second, she paused, not to look back, not to reconsider, but simply to exist in the clarity of what had just taken place. Then she continued forward, her pace steady, her posture unchanged, and behind her, the moment remained where it was, captured, preserved, waiting for the time when it would no longer belong to memory or interpretation, but to something far more exact, something that does not shift or bend, something that reveals itself fully when it is finally seen. And as the quiet of the hallway returned, as the city lights continued their steady glow beyond the glass, one truth remained, unspoken but undeniable, that some people lose control not when they are challenged, but when they underestimate the strength of someone who no longer needs to fight to stand their ground.